Stick around for the wetness illusion from UT Dallas. Yatharth, when you're ready, the floor is all yours.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Yatharth Singhal from the University of Texas at Dallas, and today I will be presenting our work, Wetness Illusion in Midair. This work was done in collaboration with my colleagues Daniel Honrales, Professor Shini Ho from Kyushu University, and my advisor, Dr. Jin Ryong Kim. Humans constantly perceive a wide range of sensations when interacting with the environment. We perceive touch when interacting with our surroundings or even with each other. We detect changes in temperature when touching a hot or cold object. In addition to this, we also feel wetness when putting our hand through running water. All these senses are usually perceived because of specialized receptors present in our skin. For example, we use mechanoreceptors to pick up touch input, hot or cold thermoreceptors to get thermal information. However, when it comes to wetness, there are no dedicated receptors present in our skin to perceive wetness. So how are humans able to perceive wetness despite the absence of wet receptors? Previous studies have suggested that the wetness sensations are perceived by a combination of thermal and tactile sensations. While this is very interesting, it also means that it is possible to invoke artificial wetness sensations by combining these modalities together. As VR systems are becoming more and more engaging with increased focus on integrating multiple modalities, incorporating wetness feedback becomes crucial for immersive applications. Existing methods for providing wet feedback in VR often involve directly applying moisture to user skin when they interact with virtually wet objects. But these systems tend to be bulkier and often require a complex hardware setup. Another approach is to create the illusion of wetness by combining thermal and tactile feedback. This involves using devices that provide both temperature changes and touch sensations on the skin at the same time. Although this method is still underexplored, a few attempts have been made, mostly focusing on using cold sensation to simulate wetness. But wearing a device isn't always ideal because it can restrict users' ability to freely interact with virtual objects, limiting natural movements in VR. So what if we could elicit wet sensations by utilizing a non-contact method? Introducing our work, Wetness Illusion in Midair. This approach combines thermal and tactile modalities in midair, so thereby freeing users' hands or the body parts so that they can interact with virtual objects. So to study this approach, we utilized a hexagonal-shaped chamber with open top to provide combined thermal and tactile sensations in midair. This chamber consists of two heating modules on the side, consisting of a ceramic heating element and fans. The ceramic heaters are responsible for providing heat sensations, while the wind from the fan is used as tactile source. It has an open top area in which people can perceive integrated thermal and tactile feedback together. We conducted 2 user studies to verify our approach and study different factors that affect perception of wetness. In the first study, we investigate whether illusory wet sensations can be created by thermal and tactile integration. We also look at different factors that influence this illusion and to see which one has the biggest impact. We conducted a study with 16 participants focusing on 3 key factors: temperature, pressure, and visual feedback. We tested 3 temperature levels: high, which was 44 degrees Celsius, low, 38 degrees Celsius, and no temperature, which was basically room temperature at 23 degrees Celsius. Similarly, we tested 3 pressure levels: high, low, and no pressure. The pressure was controlled by changing the speed of the fan. So essentially, we were just changing the RPM to change pressure. Finally, we also studied the effect of visual feedback. For this, we created 2 visual scenes: campfire and steam. The campfire scenario invoked little to no wetness expectation, whereas steam scenario provided expectations of wetness when users interacted with it. For each trial, participants interacted with the setup for 10 seconds and then rated their wetness perception on a scale of 0 to 3. 0 meaning no wetness perception at all, and 3 highlighting clear wetness perception. The results showed a direct correlation between warmth and the probability of wetness perception, with higher temperatures leading to greater probability of perceiving wetness illusion. While no clear differences between low and high pressure conditions were observed, they were both found to elicit better wet sensations than the no pressure condition. We also observed that participants rated wetness sensation to be clearer when interacting with steam scene as compared to campfire scenario. This was extremely interesting as this highlighted a possible connection between visual context and wetness sensations. So our previous study revealed a significant effect of visual congruency on wetness illusion. In this study, we dive deep into understanding the effects of these visual factors on wetness perception. We designed two different scenes, a water fountain scene and a sink scene, and we also varied the visual wetness amount in each scene. In fountain scenario, participants could interact with hot water hitting the inside of the palm. As we changed the amount of water or the width of the stream would increase. In the sink scene, participants could dip their hands into the water, feeling it on both sides of their hand. With a small amount of water, they could only partially submerge their hand, but with larger amount, they were able to fully submerge their hand inside the water. The overall procedure for the study was similar to the previous one. So they interacted with the system for 10 seconds, and after that rated their wetness sensations on a scale of 0 to 3. We observed that participants felt a clear wetness illusion when interacting with sink condition. Seeing their hands covered with water from both sides gave them perception of clear wetness illusion. It was also observed that wetness illusion was more frequent with high visual amount for both the scenes, thus highlighting that visual congruence plays a significant role in wetness illusion. So since we went through two studies and a lot of results, so in order to simplify our key findings, here are some key takeaways from this research. We demonstrated the potential of illusion-based mid-air wetness feedback. Usually, feeling wet involves direct contact with moisture or a surface. However, we show that using thermal cues through airflow combined with appropriate visuals can create the sensation of wetness without any physical contact. Historically, research on wetness perception focused mainly on cold sensations, linking wetness to skin's heat loss. Warm sensations were seen as secondary or thought to weaken or even block the feeling of wetness. However, our research shows that warm sensations, when combined with pressure, can effectively create a sense of wetness. We found a strong positive correlation between temperature and perceived wetness, suggesting that higher temperature enhanced the feeling of wetness. We found that pressure is a crucial factor in wetness perception. Our method of applying pressure in midair shows a positive relationship with how wet participants feel, suggesting that high pressure levels increase both wetness ratings and likelihood of experiencing wetness. We propose that matching visual stimuli is essential for enhancing the sensation of wetness. When visual cues align with typical wetness experiences like steam, people tend to rate their perceived wetness higher than in situations with conflicting visuals, such as the campfire. We further demonstrated how visual cues influence wet perception and found that contextual information from visual environment affect how wetness is perceived. Generally, conditions with more visible wetness, such as higher liquid volume or greater hand submersion, were perceived as having clear wetness. Finally, the interaction between thermal and tactile cues is crucial for wet perception. However, the likelihood of perceiving wetness approached almost 100% with high thermal levels, steam visuals, and some pressure. This indicates that combining these sensory inputs allows for reliable wet simulation without direct touch or cold sensations. That was all for my talk. Thank you for being patient and listening to my talk. And I once again would like to thank all my co-authors, and please feel free to ask any questions.
Okay. Interesting talk. Thank you. I have a question in the back.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I have a question. Have you also looked into galvanic skin response? Because you basically said if you have higher temperature, you also have like a higher tendency to have the wetness illusion. But do you maybe think that has something to do with the amount of sweat that you produce with higher temperatures?
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. We specifically paid attention to this. So therefore, in our study design, the participants only interacted with the system for 10 seconds at a time. And we made sure that, this time is not enough for them to have sweat on their hands.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, yes. You guys are making me work here.
Thank you for presentation. I wonder if wetness illusion in midwear occur in the absence of visual cues or guidance.
Can you please repeat your question?
The wetness illusion occur in the absence of the visual cues or visual guidance.
That's a great question. So we tested and we couldn't find any reliable evidence of people perceiving wet feedback without visual cues. However, we also tested only visual cues and no thermal and pressure, and we couldn't find any reliable evidence of people perceiving wetness there as well. So it's highly important that it's a multimodal interaction of all these modalities combined together for people to feel wetness reliably and clearly. Yeah.
Last call. Okay. I see a lot of people that have stayed. You guys have all stayed. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure the speakers do too. So thank you. And let's give all of our speakers a big round.
Thank you.
Okay. We now invite you to have your own wetness illusion experience through the coffee break or water of your choice. Thank you all, and I'll see you around.
I gotta turn my clicker on. Okay, so with personal computers connected to the internet, we've seen a rise in multitasking, a type of work and socializing that didn't really exist before that. And some research has suggested that this has led to some shallower information processing and poor executive control. And also connected to this is this concept of cognitive residue, or more referenced in the literature as attention residue. But what I'm interested in here is things beyond just attention. But the idea of this is that some of your cognitive resources, when you switch from one task to another, remain stuck with the first task. So some of the things that you're thinking about attending to, things in your memory, are stuck with the first thing while you're trying to focus on the second thing. And this can impact your performance on the second thing. And so what we're interested in doing with this study is exploring methods to reduce that as you switch from one task to another. So we turn first to research on interruptions. There's this anatomy of an interruption graph from Trafton and Monk here. But the idea is that the transition space between tasks is a good opportunity to insert some information or interactions to help you disengage from the previous task and prepare you for the next thing. And so those are these lag periods that they describe between there. We also look to research on micro breaks, which are short breaks inserted between tasks, usually in exposure to nature, either in the real world or digitally, or an exercise break to help clear up some of these cognitive resources. And this can be shown to reduce fatigue and increase vigor overall, or improve task performance. And so now thinking about this in XR, so we're thinking about a future where we will switch between XR environments more. So not just switching between desktop environments, but full spatial environments. And so how does cognitive residue work in a spatial sense? And can we insert transition experiences between different environments, different spatial tasks to help clear users' minds between these things? So we conducted an IRB approved within subjects experiment to look into this. You can see a photo of the participant in this experiment and me sitting down. And we used a Meta Quest Pro headset with a light blocker for this, so a fully immersive VR experience. So what participants experienced during this, they went through a series of narrative experiences in a virtual environment that directed them to look at some different objects, and then they experienced a transition, and then a bunch more virtual environments, this just in series, and we did some spatial recall tasks throughout. There's a training period as well. So let's look at what these environments looked like. Here are some screenshots of the environments. They were exposed to participants in a random order. And we'll look at the a sequence of 2 to give an idea of more specifically what happened. So as the snowy landscape environment ended, there is a transition experience, and then immediately there is a spatial recall task. The current environment, which is this medieval marketplace environment, was described, another recall task, and then a series of objects in that environment were described to participants that they had to look at. So here's a top-down view of this, of one of these environments, so participants standing in the middle, and now we'll look at what each of these objects were. They were arranged roughly in a circle around participants, took up about the same size as participants' field of view on the headset. And so basically a narrative described each of these objects and directed them to look at them. These objects are important because then these were tested in each of the spatial recall tasks in a random order. So these spatial recall tasks then, so in the current environment, there would be a pop-up if the participant is facing in the direction of that orange arrow. They would be prompted to point to something where something was in the previous environment that they no longer see. So this is their position and direction relative to that previous environment. And so they're asked to point to the hut in this, which is in the direction of the blue arrow. So in their current environment, to correctly get this, they would point in that direction. And we measured the error between that. Now for the transition experiences. So we tested 5 of these different transitions. So kind of an unbalanced 2x2 design with a baseline here. So we tested 2 different durations. So a 20-second duration as our shorter one. We chose this duration as the approximate time it took us to quit a app on a mobile headset and start another one. And we also looked at 60 seconds, which from the micro break literature is suggested as a duration of a short break between 2 tasks. For the content, we looked at just a simple fade to black transition, and so nothing is displayed during these durations. And our other transition content was a nature scene, which you can see a screenshot of here, a 360 image of a forest environment that didn't have any audio cues and was fairly visually uniform in every direction, and was supposed to be experienced as this break between things, not directing them in any specific way. And our baseline condition was just a instantaneous cut from environment to environment. So the things that we measured here, so most importantly, the spatial memory recall task error. So this was the angular error between where they pointed to and the true direction to that object from their controller. We also measured user motion data, which became useful for a follow-up analysis that I'll describe shortly. And we collected subjective data to capture how the user experienced this with the UEQ and questions about the continuity. And so our hypotheses again, the goal of the transitions here is to reduce that spatial cognitive residue of the previous environment. And so we hypothesized that the longer the transition, the less residue people would experience. And we also hypothesized that the nature scene would also lower the residue compared to the blank transition compared to the baseline. And so for our results here, again, we want to shoot for that. We want to shoot for that lower residue with these transition methods. And an important note here is that the higher error corresponds to lower residue. So the worse participants do, the better. So here are results for the angular error. So this will be a qualitative annotation of the residue. I'll refer you to the paper for the details of the stats, but the thing to note is that, as described by the significance whiskers, the long transitions were significantly different from the baseline transition in terms of recall task error. So for our hypotheses, we partially accept in that the long transition was lower residue than the baseline, but we can't really say anything about the transition content. During this experiment, we noticed that participants tended to look around more during the nature scene transition. So we were wondering if there was a correlation between how much people explored the scene and their spatial residue, and we found that was the case here. So yes, higher head rotation in terms of angular movement during the transition period corresponded with lower residue. In terms of user experience, I will just quickly direct you to the attractiveness and hedonic or aesthetic experience part of the user experience questionnaire, where these the rightmost ones were the ones that again lowered residue the most, but the blank transition was not very appreciated by participants, and they rated the nature scene highly for this. So to reiterate the key takeaways quickly: longer transitions, lower residue, more head motion when there's something to look at corresponds to less residue, and that these nature scenes rate more highly for attractiveness and aesthetics. I think a direction for future work is looking at ways to reduce the time it takes to reduce this residue. So, and doing that in ways like using dynamic distractors that get participants to move more, or using interaction could be a way to shrink this time, and examine how different factors like presence relate to this residue as well. For example, if more presence in one environment would make that stick more in people's minds as they go to the next one, and examine more active task scenarios. So this was a purely observational task, right, of looking at different objects in no time pressure. So I think that will be an interesting thing to look at, and also look at the residue of the intermediate transition environment. Was not tested in this study, but how does that affect their next experience? And that is our work, exploring spatial cognitive residue. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Really interesting work. Did the exposure time in each of the environments, did it moderate any of the spatial recall effects?
So not in the environments. So thank you for the question. The time that they were in each environment was fixed. So each object description was 20 seconds long. Yeah, so basically every one of those boxes that showed the progression was the same duration for each environment. Is that the question? Yes, okay.
Hi, thank you. Nico Feld from the University of Trier. I really like the idea that transitions is not just only for bridging experience, but making a mental cut. So you measured orientation was your main measure that's indicating the cognitive residue, but how you were making sure that the people are not losing orientation and still have the same cognitive residue?
Losing orientation to the physical environment, for example, or?
Yes, so maybe you said that during the transitions, the people were looking around. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's just that they lost orientation in comparison to the previous environment. Mm-hmm. And then they were actually still maybe just pointing to the in the same directions, but they had like this egocentric, I think that's actually a term in orientation research, an egocentric error. But the direction in comparison to their perceived orientation was still correct to each of the objects.
I see what you are asking, right? And if their like frame of reference had rotated, and yes, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I think there might be a way to analyze that with what we have collected, but I will have to get back to you on this. I think this is an interesting question for sure.
So I'm currently in the same situation and trying to measure orientation. I think like this egocentric frame, you can calculate it based on that angular errors. So we can have a talk about it.
Yes, let's do that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Maybe just a last quick question.
Hi, Matt. Great talk. Yifei Chang from Carnegie Mellon University. Very, very quick and naive question. Did you consider as a comparison just having someone to take off the headset? Is that something that was considered? Just wondering about if you have any intuition about the results there.
Sure. Yeah, so I think the, so interesting. So you would go back to the physical environment, and that is your break between tasks, essentially. For this work, I think we were situating it in a context where you just have the headset on and you're switching quickly between things. But I think this is a good, idea as like, if you're trying to reduce the residue between one thing to another, maybe it is a good idea just to come back to the real world and connect with your surroundings. And that would surely have benefits too for, like maintaining orientation in your physical environment overall, because that's another thing that happens as you, get more and more into VR. If you're looking around and things, you lose more of your orientation to the physical environment. So I think that is worth looking into as well. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Let's thank our speaker again. And yeah, obviously we all want to continue the discussion, so you can obviously discuss on site, and if you are online, you can also use the Discord channel to ask the question. So, okay, our next talk is about virtual agent and group size. So let's listen to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sungchul, Assistant Professor at Kansas State University. I'm happy to introduce our research exploring implicit and explicit stimuli of virtual agents with the increased group size in VR. A number of research has found that virtual avatars or agents impact the experience, emotion, cognition, task performance, and social interaction. However, the majority of previous studies focused on the effect of the explicit behavior of these avatars. On the other hand, the effect of implicit behavior has not been studied sufficiently yet. Our other motivation for this investigation is the uncertainty around surrounding whether the effect of an agent's implicit behavior can be amplified as the group size increased. We conjectured that the impact of implicit behavior could be significantly amplified by presenting the virtual agent as a virtual crowd, which is becoming more feasible nowadays. Of course, if the majority number of virtual agents in a group shows the implicit behavior, it could be sufficient to influence the user. However, our research question is, what about if there are proportionally larger group of virtual agents with implicit behavior? So for example, which is larger between 1/10 of a group of people or 100 of people? Numerically, they are the same, but their influence may differ. To give an answer to the question, in this research, we established the two main research questions. Do implicit behavior of virtual agent affect user experience, emotion, and behavior in a similar manner as the explicit behavior do? Second, does the degree of impact caused by virtual agents' implicit behavior increases as their group size increases? To investigate the research question, we designed two consequence studies: the user study for evaluate the impact of group size and the implicit behavior of virtual agents, and the second study is for psychometric experiment to confirm the given behavior was implicit or explicit. So probably here the term implicit may be confusing because it could be different depending on each context. So in this research, we defined it based on human perception. There has been extensive discussion regarding the threshold to judge the unconsciousness responses in psychology. But this is beyond our paper, so we loosely selected the conventional detection threshold. We used a below the detection chance level of 50% as the implicit behavior in this study. We designed the user study 2x3 mixed factorial design, where the group size was handled as a within factor and the behavior type was handled as a between factor. In this study, participants were asked to give a 3-minute presentation with simple topics like a dog, flower, and a whale to the virtual agent audience. Through the study, we collected subjective responses, including social presence, co-presence, influence, which is our customized question of whether they were being influenced, engagement, body ownership, and emotion, utilizing 32 discrete emotion items. We also collected head and eye behavior as the objective responses. We designed the virtual agent behavior utilizing eye movement as an implicit behavior and head movement as an explicit behavior. Both behaviors manipulated the eye or head movement to the left direction for 2 seconds, so head turning and eye shifting. In terms of the group size, we kept the 20% of virtual agent behavior across all the conditions. The first row in this picture indicated the implicit behavior condition with eye movement, and the second row indicated the explicit behavior condition with a head movement. For example, in figure A, we manipulated the eye movement for only 1 agent out of 5, and in figure C here, we manipulated the 3 agent behavior out of 15, so we kept 20% in all conditions. The assigned agents were random, and we activated the behavior twice per minute for 2 seconds. Thus, the total number of events was 6 times per condition. To address the research question, we set 4 hypotheses. Hypothesis 1 was the explicit head movement of the virtual agent will cause more observable changes in the participant behavior compared to the implicit eye movement of the agent. We established this hypothesis based on previous research. And the hypothesis 2, however, the 2 behavior types of agent would not affect the participant differently in terms of social presence, co-presence, engagement, and body ownership, except for influence. We also designed the experiment to provide a similar level of immersion and illusion. Third, both about the behavior types would yield qualitatively different emotional responses from the user. We conjecture that, for example, head shifting gives a kind of a negative impact, while because it somehow rejects their presentation, but on the other hand, the eye movement somehow gives a positive responses to the user, because something we can utilize eye movement when we think about that topic. Lastly, the larger the group size, the greater the effect of both explicit and implicit behavior of the agent on the user. We established this hypothesis because the effect of eye and head movement can be amplified as the group size increases. So in this study, 12 participants per eye and head condition, so total of 25 participants were involved. Since the task is for public speaking, we surveyed the personality trait using simple self-reporting, and also collected the data for the public speaking anxiety, social anxiety, and the public speaking experience in VR. We conclude that our population was not skewed significantly. We conduct the study using this procedure. Each participant, either in eye or head condition, repeated the public speaking experiences with the 3 different topics 3 times with different group size, small, medium, large. The psychophysical experiment always followed after we completed all the user study to avoid learning effect. To investigate the detection ability, we varied the number of agents at various levels, as shown in this table. Since eye conditions are harder to observe compared to head condition, we distribute the percentage from 0 to 100% for eye condition, while we only provided 0 to 30% for the head condition. We utilize a 2 alternative forced choice response where participants were required to answer the question regarding did you see an unusual behavior with a yes or no responses within 3 seconds. Let me play the video. So this is our video recording for the user study and the subsequent psychophysical experiment. So this one shows the eye behavior. So to capture this eye behavior through the HMD, we scaled up by 12 times. So this is a little bit blurry to check it out, but obviously we sure that before we started study, we confirmed the eye behavior detection was worked well, can be visible well, including the third row in this small classroom, the agent, which is the farthest position from the user. This shows the head behavior, and the head turning is much clearly visible to the user. And this shows that medium size, and the next one shows that large size. This is the large size video. And then the following one is the psychometric study. And then, yes, we conducted this study like this way. Since it is important to check if the given stimuli were implicit or explicit, we analyzed the psychophysical experiment result first. We confirmed that the detection ability in eye condition followed the sigmoid function as you see here in this table, and the 50% of correct answers were approximately reached below 50% of the number of virtual agents, which the number was between the 7 to 9, while our maximum number of behavior agents in eye condition that we used was 3. So we confirmed that it was fine. We found significant difference from the user study through the multiple dependent variables, and the majority were in agent behavior type, but we also observed significant differences in group size as well. This table shows the descriptive statistics, and we observed that highest mean value were mostly found in medium or large size of group rather than small size of the group. So here's our research summary. The implicit stimuli of the agent may not be as strong as the effect of explicit stimuli. However, the implicit stimuli of the agent are strong enough to affect the user's internal psychological process. Because we found out significant results from the subjective responses and the emotional responses. More interestingly, the implicit behavior allows positive emotional responses, while the explicit behavior aroused the negative emotion in our study as we hypothesized. So finally, we should draw attention to the modulating effect of the group size of this implicit influence of the agent. From our research, we introduced a new research question. Also, we suggest the potential design aspect in virtual reality experience with massive virtual agent. Designers, researchers, developers may need to consider with the unique use of a virtual agent group as they can impact on the emotion, subject responses, and behavior without influencing their VR experience significantly. And this could lead to the user experience imperceptually. However, the improper use of virtual agent may lead to unexpected outcome, so we need to carefully design the agent behavior and the group size. Of course, we also found a couple of limitations from our studies. Most important one is that the group size effect with implicit stimuli was mostly minimal. So we need to, obviously, further investigation is required. Also, in terms of emotion, even though we hypothesize like that, it is still beyond our scope to explain at this moment, so further investigation is required. Also, the VR headset has a form factor limitation, like the resolution and the FOV is the limitation, so this also needs to be addressed, considered in the future study. The group size also should be tested with a massive crowd. Human-like behavior, gender balances also need to be considered in the future study. All right, thank you for your attention, and then I'm happy to have your question or feedback.
Hi, thanks very much for the talk. That was super interesting. I'm Sean from the University of Glasgow, and I had a quick question regarding the head-turning condition, like the explicit crowd. So obviously in the clips, like all the crowds are turning their heads same direction, same time. It's giving hive mind, if we're being real. Was there any kind of thought about kind of exploring the I guess like scaling up and down the entropy of that kind of interaction, so it goes from a very uniform, the crowd is not looking at you versus looking at you, versus maybe one person's turning their head that way, one person's looking down, this person, and varying that stuff? And do you have a sense of how you think that might impact kind of the results, or is it something you're going to look into in the future?
That's a really good question. Thank you for the question. So actually, we also, from the reviewers, we also get the indication that it could be the strong limitation. Our intention for this study was that this is a preliminary study that we want to investigate if the implicit behavior and explicit behavior may impact on human emotion or general experience. So that is intentionally we set that very weird, unnatural head turning, because no one can. If I ask you guys to head turn please, then maybe some got to head turn left side and right side. So obviously we need to Actually, we already started the next study already, and in that study, we involved more human-like behavior, not the non-human-like behavior. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time, so we'll thanks our speaker. Switch to the next one. You will have to time then to continue conversation during the lunch. Our next speaker will talk about plausibility in VR. Yep, great.
Right. Thank you very much. My name is Larissa Brübach, and I'm from the HCI group at the University of Würzburg. And I will present our work, Manipulating Immersion, the Impact of Perceptual Incongruencies on the Perceived Plausibility in Virtual Reality. My co-authors are Mona Röhm, Franziska Westermeier, Marc-Erich Latoschik, and Caroline Wienrich. So first, let's talk a little about immersion in virtual reality, because it is part of the title, so it's quite important. And we know that it can influence one's VR experience. And it is an important concept because it provides the boundaries in which place illusion can occur. And if we look at the current mostly used presence model, we can see that the place illusion is directly impacted by the immersion. And it is not at all connected to the plausibility illusion because those two factors are orthogonal. So we can see that immersion should not influence plausibility. So why am I even interested if immersion influences plausibility? Well, it is part of my research because plausibility has gained more and more attention in the recent time, especially since my two professors introduced the congruence and plausibility model in 2022, which puts plausibility and congruence at the center. So what does this model look like? Because some of you might not know. So on the left side, we have the manipulation space, which consists of 3 layers where we can influence participants. This then leads over to the condition space using a weighted activation function. And this plausibility then influences the qualia space, which includes our normal measures like presence, social presence, or co-presence. And in this case, immersion would be on the perceptual level, which means that immersion can influence plausibility. And here we can see that this is a difference between the presence model from Stater and our current presence model. So to research this, we took advantage of breaks in plausibility, as we have done quite some time before, an analogy to breaks in presence. To research this, we are manipulating plausibility on different levels in this study. Firstly, the immersion manipulation is through different tracking qualities, and then we have a cognitive manipulation through familiar size. If we go back to the CIP model, the familiar size would be on the cognitive level and immersion would be on the perceptual level. So we have different hypotheses about what's going to happen. And the first is that incongruencies caused by the familiar size manipulation will result in a significantly lower perceived plausibility. We think the same would be true for the tracking manipulation. Our third hypothesis is that these incongruencies will also result in a significantly lower presence. That is true for the familiar size and the tracking manipulation. And lastly, because the immersion manipulation is on the perceptual level, we think that it will cause a difference in the spatial presence. However, we do not expect this effect for the familiar size manipulation. So we did a 2x3 within subject design study with a total of 32 participants. We had 2 familiar size conditions and 3 tracking conditions, and I will go into these in just a minute. Our dependent variables are the perceived plausibility, presence, spatial presence, the task load, and virtual reality sickness. We designed quite a simple supermarket environment because the familiar size, for the familiar size to work, we need objects to move towards the participants, and a conveyor belt does that without the participants needing to move too much. So the task was just that participants had to scan items as if they were a cashier. So what did the manipulations look like? The familiar size manipulation was that usually, this is the not manipulated condition, when objects move towards us, they increase in size because they get closer to us. But in our manipulated conditions, they would stay the same size. So no matter how far away they were from participants, they appeared the same size. For the immersion manipulation, we chose the tracking of the headset. So our first condition was that just we had a normal rotation and translation, so participants could move their head with the HMD like they were used to. The second condition is the rotation-only condition. So participants could rotate their head and their view would change, but the translation or the position of the headset, if they moved it in the virtual space, would not be represented in their view. So they could control their position with a controller. And lastly, in the third condition, the stereoscopic view-only condition, participants could not use the normal rotation and translation of the headset. They had to control their whole view using controllers. So this had some implications on our study design because we had these 6 conditions. But as you can imagine, and as we expected, participants would get quite sick when they only had a stereoscopic view and the headset or the view would not move. So We used a Latin square and to avoid the sequence effects as much as possible, what we did always append the last two conditions of the stereoscopic view to make sure that participants did not need to drop out during the experiment from feeling too sick. We had a quite standard procedure, so participants did sign some consent forms, they had some pre-questionnaires, and then they had a short tutorial. As you can imagine, controlling your view with the controllers is not very intuitive, so we had participants practice beforehand to make sure that they understood how to control their view. Then we started with the VR exposure, and then they answered some post-questionnaires. This was repeated 6 times. And then in the end, we had a quite important debriefing because we asked participants if they were okay to leave the lab or if they needed a few more minutes because they felt too sick. Let's look at the results. So we did have a significant main effect in the task load, which we expected. The stereoscopic view only condition was significantly more difficult than the other 2 conditions because participants had to control the view with both of the controllers and focus on the task. And then did we find more virtual reality sickness? Yes, yes we did for both conditions, but we can say that none of our participants dropped out due to feeling too sick, and also none of the participants reported virtual reality sickness that was too high to leave the lab immediately after the experiment. So our first hypothesis was that the familiar size manipulation would influence the perceived plausibility. And we did find a significant main effect in the perceived plausibility questionnaire. And this was that the perceived plausibility was lower in the manipulated condition than the not manipulated condition. Ignore that sign, it is the wrong way around. For our second hypothesis, we can say that we asked if incongruencies caused by the tracking manipulation would also reduce the perceived plausibility. And again, we can see that we found a significant main effect, and it is between both the stereoscopic view only condition and both of the other 2 conditions. However, we did not find a significant effect between the normal condition and the rotation only condition. The third hypothesis was that the familiar size manipulation would also influence presence. Again, we did find a significant main effect, so we can accept this hypothesis. And again, the sign is the wrong way around. For the fourth hypothesis already, we can see that we asked if the tracking manipulation would also reduce the presence. And again, we found a significant main effect accepting this hypothesis. And again, we only found it between the stereoscopic view only condition and the 2 other conditions and not between the first 2 conditions. Lastly, for the fifth hypothesis, we asked if tracking manipulation will result in a significantly lower spatial presence, while the familiar size should not have an effect. We did find a significant main effect in the subscale of the IPQ for spatial presence, again between the stereoscopic view only condition and the other 2. And we did not find a significant main effect for our familiar size condition, so we can accept this hypothesis as well. I already mentioned one of our greatest limitations, which is the possible sequence effects from always appending the stereoscopic view only condition. But we felt like it was more important that participants could finish the experiment rather than avoiding the sequence effects. The perceived plausibility questionnaire has been used in the past, and it has been shown to be sensitive to perceived plausibility or incongruencies in plausibility. However, it has not been formally validated yet. We did find a higher workload and the VR sickness. However, as I mentioned before, all participants could finish the experiment, and also all participants were able to finish the task within the experiment. Lastly, we had quite an abstract supermarket environment, so there was no background noise, there was no other customers in there. It was just the participants scanning the items, so it was quite abstract. For our conclusions, so firstly, we can say that cognitive incongruencies, in this case the familiar size manipulation, can influence both the perceived plausibility and presence. And the perceptual incongruencies, in this case, the tracking manipulation, so altered immersion can do the same. And we can explain this looking at the CAP model. However, we have some limitations in the previous model where those two factors should not influence each other because it's quite a binary view, but we found that they do influence each other. This is the reference used, and thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Maybe one or two quick questions. Any? I'm sure one of you at least have a question.
I'm also here for the rest of the conference. So.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Nico Feld from the Trier University. I was just wondering, so the people with the zero DOF, so the stereoscopic, they had reported a larger sickness, and what was the other thing?
Task load.
Yeah, so how do you make sure that these were not the main factors of the lower presence? So because as you told that these questionnaires really can be affected by other factors really easily, and if maybe that's just already a plausibility issue if your view is following your eye movement. So that's not just a lower immersion, but also from design a lower plausibility illusion. Or am I wrong with that?
No, you're completely correct. So we use the different immersion types to break the plausibility and to actually cause this. So the main focus on our study was how can we influence the plausibility through immersion and see which effect this has on the other tasks. So we cannot completely make sure that the task load or the VR sickness did not play a role in how present the people felt. So that would be interesting in the future to find something that is more similar in those factors. But yes, breaking plausibility through immersion was the main goal of this.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's thank our speaker again and switch to the last presenter. The last presenter of this session. Hopefully everything will work now.
Let's hope.
Because otherwise everyone will leave for lunch. So
That's a fair. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
That looks good.
So our last talk will be about more ERP stuff, I guess. Yep.
Okay, can I go? Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Francesco, and today I'm happy to talk to you on behalf of my co-author Yannick, Thomas, Christian and Thomas again about how to detect visual discomfort in HMDs. Visual discomfort and sensing discomfort is something that has been around in the VR community for a long time, and also has kind of put many barriers in VR acceptance in multiple applications. So the idea of this paper is actually that we want to try to automatize the detection of visual discomfort while interacting in VR. So there are many factors that actually cause visual discomfort in VR. So some of those are flickering or update latency. So when we are interacting in VR, actually there is some delay when we act on the environment, binocular asymmetry, chromatic aberration, and blur. And all of those, or actually some of those, have been investigated with different types of measures. So we had also in the previous presentation good use of subjective measure for sensing discomfort and cyber sickness, but also other approaches actually also use skin conductance, heart rate, and actually EEG as implicit evaluation for visual discomfort. So in this work, we're gonna focus on blur and binocular symmetry, as they've been kind of underlooked in VR in research. So to give a sort of background on what we can use EEG for sensing visual discomfort, when we focus on the frequency domain, cybersynchronous actually was associated with increased low frequency increase. So for example, beta was actually correlate with cybersynchronous severity, and also how the different actually brain areas actually communicating is actually impacted by cybersynchronous, causing sensory conflict. The problem with the frequencies, for example, is that they are specific. So we know that there are many ways that we can actually elicit a change in the frequency. So when we, for example, detect a change in alpha, in theta, and delta, for example, we might not always be sure that we can actually detect visual discomfort. Therefore, we actually propose a different approach. So we actually plan to use ERPs in our work. So, and ideally, when we actually interacting with visual stimuli, there is a pattern that we actually can expect, which is the P1 and 2 and P3. So basically, we have a variation in the brain signals that first underscores the early sensory processing. So this is the P1 component, and then we have sudden negativity, which is basically the N2, which is linked to conflict monitoring. So basically, when the user is actually monitoring if the stimuli is actually matching the expectation when interacting with it. And lastly, we have a P3 component, which is kind of pretty common also in HCI and visualization, that basically is a measure of how many actually resources are needed to process the stimuli. This differs from the P1 because the P1 relies on the processing or the perceptual processing, while the P3 actually relies on the cognitive processing of the stimuli. So actually in our work, we want to investigate if different ERP response actually could discriminate between different levels of visual discomfort as indexed by the Gaussian blurs. So our task was an object manipulation. I'm going to show you later how did it work. And our independent variables were different levels of blur and the symmetry load. So for the blur intensity, we varied the Gaussian blur filter, so we changed the standard deviation of the filter. So we, of course, have a baseline of a neutral stimuli with no blur intensity, and then we varied the standard deviation of the filter. And then for the symmetry condition, we basically varied the blur for from one eye, but not the other, and also included a condition where actually no blur was actually varied as a control. So this is how the task looked like. So basically, we presented a primitive object over a gray background to avoid confounding effects for 1.8 seconds, and then we actually spawn another object, a sphere, in a random location, and then we ask the participants to move the sphere towards the previous location of the primitive object. And then, once the sphere was actually moved, the trial ended. Participants were repeating this for 50 trials for each condition in the experimental phase, but before we actually asked participants to evaluate the different stimuli they were exposed to as a validation using only questionnaires, which we're going to present later. There was also a rotation task training, so participants were actually familiarized with the task in order to avoid cybersynchronous effects that were actually also due to familiarity of the stimuli. And then, in between experimental blocks, participants filled up the SSQ questionnaire. So, jumping already to our results, we present first the ERPs, and then for each condition and also for aggregated condition for blur, and then the SSQ scores. So, this is the ERP after the presentation of the blur stimuli. So here we found that actually there were no effects neither on the P1 or P3. So basically, any of the conditions that were evoking visual discomfort were actually impacting early perceptual processing or late cognitive processing, but we found a negative effect on the inner amplitude with increasing blur effects. So this basically means that the blur impacts the conflict monitoring, causing more visual discomfort, only indexed by the N2. Then when we actually compared only neutral versus blur conditions, we actually found a series of significant effects at all our ERP components. So basically, we found that when you are experiencing visual discomfort, your perceptual processing is impact, as shown by the P1 component. Same applies to the N2, so this is a consistent results also from our previous analysis. And lastly, also your cognitive resource allocation is impacted. So basically, for participants needs more resources when they are in a visual discomfort situation. And this was also confirmed by our results as a validation. So basically, before and after the experiment, we asked participants to report the level of nausea, oculomotor interferences, and disorientation before and after the experiment. And here you can see that after the experiment, participants felt more more cyber-sick. So basically, our manipulation were actually working. So what can we say about our results? What can we do with our results? So we identified we actually were able first to evoke components that were actually associated with visual processing in the context of cyber sickness. So this is an initial contribution. And second, we identified a series of components that can be informative for the evaluation of cyber sickness in VR. So when actually investigating symmetry and blur, we found that actually the early visual processing is resistant to this. So there is no actually impact at the first level. But when we actually are aggregating the results for the P1, we actually found. So basically, the P1 and the N2 are actually two reliable components that can actually evaluate visual discomfort in VR. For the P3, the interpretation is a bit different because the P3 was resistant to the experimental manipulation. Therefore, our interpretation is that basically the brain kind of, given the conflict mismatch that is detected at the N2 level after 20 milliseconds, kind of adapts and basically provides more resources to the user to kind of deal with the discomforting stimuli. How can we actually then try to make sense of this lacking of P3 results? So the idea is that in our study we only presented the stimuli, the visual stimuli. Another approach here to evoke and actually evaluate how much the P3 relies on the resources that are allocated to the task is actually to use a nodal paradigm. So basically, a nodal paradigm is when you present a series of sounds that are kind of always the same, consistent. And then there is also the position of a deviant one. And the deviant one basically relies on the detection of the deviancy of the different sound presented. So the idea is that like if you are in a high visual discomfort situation, you might not be able to detect a different perception of, detect a different sound, and therefore the P3 could actually be used in this sense. All of those ideas have to rely on machine learning detection. So our data are actually openly available for application of machine learning models to detect different levels of discomfort. That's actually what we propose to do in our future work. And also, we only inspected few elicitation metrics, so using blur and symmetry convergences. So there are actually more. So convergence demands on ambient occlusion should be investigated and see if our approach can actually generalize using ERPs for discomfort detection. With this, I'm happy to conclude my presentation and happy to take any questions. Thank you for attending this talk.
Thank you. Is there any question? Actually, I have one. Did you find any interaction with, I don't know, learning effects or demographic effect, like experience in XR for the participants to these results?
We actually, when we collect data, we actually surveyed it. And we actually rejected participants that were not familiar at all. So we tried to deal with users that are actually potentially familiar. So I cannot answer your question in that sense. But our results from the subjective results, I would say there are kind of supporting that the manipulation was actually effective in causing the discomfort, so it should be robust towards experience and demographics as well.
I think it's not related to the like surprise or
No, also
or
because that's why we had also the training phase as well. So we wanted them to familiarize with the discomfort in a sense and make them evaluate the stimuli.
Thank you. So thank you very much. Let's thanks all our speakers one last time.